The Ole Miss Rebels and Georgia Bulldogs get set to do battle Saturday in Oxford. We're here previewing, predicting, and breaking down this game between the Rebels and the Dogs. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Phillips. He's Dave Shumate. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us across all social media platforms as well as our website, SECUnfiltered.com. This segment brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com. Use promo code SECU at sign up to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 or more lineup. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code SECU to get your $50 bonus today. The Ole Miss Rebels and Georgia Bulldogs get set to do battle at Vaught Hemingway Stadium in Oxford, Mississippi. This being the SEC Unfiltered Tour game of the weekend. We will be on hand at the Grove, at the Vaught, taking in this battle between the Dogs and the Rebels. I am Chris Phillips. He is Dave Shumate. We are here previewing, predicting, and breaking down this game. Dave, appreciate you taking the time and excited to talk all things Rebels and Bulldogs with you.
No, dude, I'm fired up about it. It's a must-win for Ole Miss. It's a game we had circled as a big game going into the season. I think everybody did. 2024 heading into the 2024 season for Ole Miss and Georgia. I think a lot of people, myself included, probably had Ole Miss rolling in this one undefeated. Again, here we are sitting at 2 losses. This is the season for them. You have to win this game. Obviously, finish out the path against Florida, Mississippi State. That's your chance to the college football playoff. Georgia still got another get-out-of-jail-free card. I still think at 10-2. They would get in, but I feel really good about their chances of they win this week. You feel good. They play Tennessee next week at home. So, overall, this is a bigger game for Georgia. For Ole Miss. Have to have it at home. Georgia, though, the inconsistencies for both these teams really across the board. But it looked like last week one team kind of maybe, not to steal a page from a political campaign, but turned the page and had their best game of the season at Arkansas. Ole Miss putting up over 60 points. Again, I think Arkansas' secondary is really bad right now and beat up a little bit. But 60 points against air, that's impressive. Georgia, got to get some things figured out, getting carried by the defense. What Carson Beck do we see here, man? And Jackson Dart's had his inconsistencies as well. It's going to be fun to see who actually plays the best at Vaught Hemingway on Saturday between Beck and Dart.
Dave, a huge game on both sides for different reasons, you could argue. We'll dive more on that in a second. And again, I want to echo the SEC Unfiltered Tour game of the weekend brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Our travels are set for Oxford, Mississippi. Dave, I've never been to the Grove. I've never been to Vaught Hemingway. I've never been to Oxford, Mississippi. Cannot wait to hang out with all the great Rebels and Bulldogs. And again, take in the Grove for all its beauty. Because what I've been told, no matter what happens this weekend on the field, Ole Miss ain't lost a tailgate yet. So should be a good time. Either way, guys, this game is a 2:30 local time kickoff there in Oxford, Mississippi on ABC. The spread in this one, Dave, Georgia is a 2.5-point favorite. The over-under set at 55. Georgia leads the all-time series 33-12-1. And of course, Dave, who can forget last year's meeting? Ole Miss went in, a lot of hype, a lot of momentum. They got run out of Sanford Stadium. Final score, 52-17. Georgia took it to Ole Miss. And you might recall, Dave, that was the game. Lane Kiffin, post-game, basically just came out and said, we don't have enough good players to compete with a team like Georgia. We don't have those guys in the trenches. We don't have these big 5 stars walking around where we can go toe-to-toe with these guys. And you look at what Walker Jones, the Grove Collective, to your point, Dave, I think it's a great point as we dive into this game and some of our top storylines and things we're most excited about. Dave, it really feels like even with some of the earlier season struggles, the Kentucky loss, which at this point just feels like it was an inexcusable loss, the game at LSU, losing in overtime at night in Death Valley, that's forgivable. But even with the 2 losses, Dave, to me, it's always felt like this is the game that is sort of the measuring stick of this is the game, Dave, that's going to tell everybody, all right, we put all of our chips in. Jackson Dart came back for the last dance. A lot of his teammates followed him. Are all the moves we made, all the chess pieces that were placed, was it all worth it? Like, what was it all? Like, this is the game to me, Dave. And I think you could argue, and I want to get your take on this. Is this the biggest Ole Miss football regular season game in school history? Like, I think you can realistically make that argument when you just think about the history of this program, what's on the line. Because to your point, Dave, this is a must win when it comes to playoff hopes. Like there's no, well, maybe this. Ole Miss is not getting in the playoff. They're not getting in the playoff with 3 or more losses. So, Dave, I'll kick it over to you. But I look at this game. This is kind of the measuring stick. This is kind of like all right, you put your money where your mouth was. Now are you going to put your play where all that was as well? Because they made the investment in NIL. They boosted the roster. They shored up the line of scrimmage. And it was all for, Dave, this game. It was all to beat this team and to take down Georgia at Vaught-Hemingway.
Yeah, you're right. Last year, it got away from them quickly in Athens, that cold night at Sanford Stadium. And like you said, Lane Kiffin post-game went and said, we don't have the guys up front. I think they went and got the guys up front defensively, and we've seen that. We've seen the fruit of that labor kind of bear. Ole Miss is definitely better up front defensively. I mean, is it the steel curtain defense? No, but I think with the style of football being so spatial now in these offensive systems, a lot of one-on-one tackles, somebody has to tackle another human being in like a 10 by 15 space. It's harder than people think. So you're going to give up some yards and stuff like that. But this Ole Miss defense, I didn't think it was their best performance against Arkansas last week. I think some of that came, though, because a little bit of a lax. I mean, they were up so big. But I think in this game, Pete Gold and them can have a good game plan. But to your point about it being the biggest game in Ole Miss history, it's definitely the biggest game, I would say, probably since 2003, and I think diehard Ole Miss fans remember this. Nick Saban, LSU, and them came into town in 2003 with Eli Manning being the quarterback at LSU, or at Ole Miss his senior year. Came back to go try to win that division. Ole Miss tied LSU for the division, but ultimately lost this game to LSU in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium in 2003. Winner would have won the West. Remember, Ole Miss has never won the West, but they do have they tied record-wise. So if you go in their stadium, you'll see it on Saturday. 2003 SEC Western Division champs. LSU went on to win the national championship that year, but it came down to a 4th and 10. Eli Manning got stepped on. His foot got stepped on by center, fell back. They lost the game. It was a good Ole Miss team, but if they win that, they win the West. So I would say it's very similar. It's on par to this game. You're right. They built the line of scrimmages in the portal for this game, but the defensive line, I think, is as good as it can get from what you built ceiling-wise. The offensive line has not lived up to what you thought it would be. Some of that's due to injuries and stuff. But, I mean, you brought in a couple guys. Julius Buelow over from Jaquan Scott from Southern Miss. I think Buelow came over from Washington, if I remember right. Just a couple guys entirely. Diego Pounds coming over as well from North Carolina. You brought in some guys to shore up because I think you made a good point, CP. When they were building this roster, it's like, look, we're not trying to just go beat Arkansas. Look, we're not just trying to go beat – I think even LSU to an extent. That's not a shot at LSU. I think it was just kind of like, nah, we feel like our roster can be better than theirs. Who do we have to go beat to win the SEC? Alabama's not on the schedule this next year. Georgia, and they're the class of the league right now. That's who we got to go see. We got the sample size of that last year in Athens. We were skill guys. We can play with these guys. Even quarterback, we can play with these guys. We got manhandled up front, especially on the offensive line. And I think there's a legitimate question. Has that changed that much? I mean, you brought in different bodies, but has it changed that much? And we see what Georgia, a motivated Georgia that knows, hey, they've tied the back of this team with the way Carson Beck and this Georgia offense have injuries in the backfield as well, some injuries on the offensive line. The Georgia defense is having to carry them right now. We saw it in the Texas game. We saw it last week. When Georgia is playing with their hair on fire, like you saw against Texas, I don't know if Ole Miss can consistently block them. I don't know if we get a similar replication of last year. But again, I don't know how much improvement there is right now as we head into this game.
Dave, that's a great point. Let's jump straight there. Do you believe from last year to this year? Because I think that's the question I had in the preseason as well. I mean, it wasn't like you lost by a field goal or a touchdown last year and you felt like, hey, we just need a few more guys, a few more pieces up front to take the next step. I mean, you got blasted. And it was like, have you closed the gap that much to go out and beat a Georgia? Because, like life and in football, and we saw this, your greatest change and your greatest victories come via adversity, right? And again, you mentioned these moves weren't made to beat an Arkansas, a Kentucky, ironically enough, maybe even LSU, but that Georgia game was the eye-opener that, you know what, we're close, but we're not where we want to be. So you applaud Ole Miss for doing that. But the question, Dave, to your point, did they do enough? Because, again, it wasn't like you were one or two guys away. Dave, You were light years away. It felt like last year. Again, different circumstance, different situation, Dave. Georgia looks way different than they did last year. You also factor in Carson Beck and his struggles, which we'll get into in a second. But I think that's a great question, Dave. And again, we're going to find out. And this game is so important to me for just the trajectory of Ole Miss football. And because the big knock on them right now, Dave, can't win the big game. Lane Kiffin can't win the big game. They're always going to be the bridesmaid, never the bride. What can you accomplish realistically in Oxford? There's a lot of people out there, Dave, that feel like you're always going to be in that position. You're always going to play second fiddle. You're always going to be a program that, you have to build up 4 or 5 years to just even get a glimmer of hope, a shot like in this position you're in. A game like this can be a narrative changer if you're Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss Rebels. And Dave, I don't want to go here. We're talking about this game. I don't want to get down some deep rabbit hole. But Dave, you know as well as I do, if this thing goes south, especially if Georgia does similar to what they did last year, you and I both know what the conversation is going to be Sunday morning. You and I both know what it's going to be going into Monday. It ain't going to be about the rest of Ole Miss's schedule. It's going to be about, hey, where's Lane Kiffin going to be in a few weeks? Is he still going to be the head man at Ole Miss? So just a massively important game for Ole Miss football from all different angles.
Yeah, I mean, it's a team that you go back and look. I mean, without having to go back and watch some of the copies to see, it's roughly like a minute 50, 2:10. They've trailed for the entire season. I mean, they've been up in every game for 98, 99% of however many minutes they played now. What they played 8 games for 60 minutes. Like they've only trailed for 2 minutes, just roughly. To Kentucky. I mean, they were up on that 4th and 7 against Kentucky. Kentucky completed for 60 yards. They went and scored. They were up against LSU the whole game until they weren't, and the game was over in overtime. And LSU never led in regulation time. And again, that's not taking anything away from LSU. They won the football game against a good football team. But point being, Ole Miss hasn't looked great this year, but I still think it's a sneaky team that, hey, they're better than people are kind of giving them credit for. And everybody's kind of had their sluggish starts this year in the SEC. Again, everybody's got a conference loss now after South Carolina beat Texas A&M on Saturday. But you're right, CP. This is the biggest game in the Lane Kiffin era. You asked if this was the biggest game in Ole Miss football history. This is definitely the biggest game in Lane Kiffin's tenure in Oxford. I would have said last year probably against LSU, that game they won, the big shootout, was a massive game for him because he totally – essentially crapped down his leg in the Alabama game the week before, so they had to go make up for it. And they ultimately did, putting up, 40 points over forget the exact score. High scoring game they won in Oxford last year against LSU. But this is similar because, like you said, if you win this game, people forget about the Kentucky game a little bit.
Yep.
10-2. Now, I'm not one it's totally even Ole Miss gets in at 10-2. That's a conversation for another day. But even if they didn't, I think people would be like, we beat Georgia, man. We did it. We're 10-2. We dropped one to Kentucky. It's unacceptable. I don't think anybody's saying the loss at LSU when you led all game and lost in overtime on the road is unacceptable unless you're just some unrealistic fan. I mean, that's a tough place to play. They don't really lose there a lot unless your name's Alabama. But no, I think this is the tone setter for the season. This season is going to be defined either success or not at around, what would you say, Chris? At around 6:30, 7 o'clock Eastern on Saturday afternoon. Game kicks off 2:30 local time. We will know by 6:37 we can give a final grade on Ole Miss's season no matter how they finish the rest of the year. I think obviously if you win, but with Florida's third-string quarterback, I don't think they're going to drop that one like they potentially could have in Gainesville. And then no offense to Jeff Levy and them, it's just I don't think they're on Ole Miss's level this year. So Ole Miss, odds-wise, Vegas-wise, they should finish 10-2 with a win here. With a loss, they probably finish 9-3. But I think by Saturday evening, as that LSU-Alabama game's kicking off, we're going to really know, yay for Ole Miss's 24 season, or we're going to go gladiator style down.
To your point, Dave, a season definer. Let's talk the other side, the Georgia Bulldogs. Again, we were obviously at that game this past weekend watching Georgia and Florida in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Dave, the score was not indicative of some of Georgia's struggles in this game, or a lot of their struggles. They win this game by 2 touchdowns, but you saw it as well as I did, and so did everybody else. Comes down the stretch, you get a late pick against the third-string quarterback. You go ahead and pad the stats and pad the lead. How concerned are you with Carson Beck? Because I think we got to start having a real conversation that people want to blame Mike Bobo, and all Mike Bobo, funny enough, Dave, has ever done in his Georgia 10 years, like have some of the best offenses in school history when it comes to points per game and what have you. So, again, that's another conversation probably for another day. But I think we got to have a real combo, Dave, that like Carson Beck is a liability for this Georgia team at this point. And I'll tell you this, kind of like Garrett Nussmeier, right? Where LSU for weeks on end, they beat Ole Miss. They're kind of skating by. He's not playing great. He's making these back-breaking, these mind-numbing decisions in regards to throwing the football in a double, triple coverage. And I mean, again, Dave, I've had 2 opportunities to watch Georgia in person to this point. This will be my 3rd upcoming this weekend. I was at the Alabama game in Tuscaloosa, and I was at the cocktail party this past weekend. And I've had a few opportunities, Dave. I was lucky enough. I was at the right angle, kind of watching him down his line of sight. And, Dave, it's one thing to throw a pick. It happens. I mean, being down his line of sight, I'm like, I don't know what he's looking at. And I'm not an SEC quarterback by any stretch, but some of these throws he's making, Dave, they're not even close. I mean, they're just throw up a prayer. Like, I think at this point, and Dave, when you talk about Georgia's offense, because to your point, the defense has carried them, they're going to be leaning on them again. But now Trevor Etienne, what is his status? Obviously, it's early in the week, but he went out of that game in the cocktail party. So, like, if this game falls on the right shoulder of Carson Beck, Dave, I don't know how well that bodes for Georgia because you think about how cold this dude's. What is it? He's got like 10 interceptions over the last 4 games, I think, or something like that. Like, he has turned into a real liability for this team.
No, I mean, there's no denying it. It kind of started off the first 3 or 4 weeks like, man, Georgia just can't get off to a good start in the first half. It's outside of the Mississippi State game. That's
who they are. That's who they are. They don't start well. That's who they are
in the first half, dude. And Carson Beck, to your point, people want to blame Mike Bobo, but again, Mike Bobo isn't telling him to throw in the triple coverage or when there's an underneath defender coming in to go pick this interception off. Like, should have had 4 interceptions. You're sitting there thinking, like, man, that isn't like a good defender just made some incredible play and you just tip your cap to him. That's a bad decision. We're banged up at the running back spot. We would love to have Broderick Robinson, just a big barreling ball who can pick up some yards moving forward. I mean, I think they like Nate Frazier a lot, the true freshman, but you hear he has fumbling issues in practice. So, Kirby doesn't fully trust him fully in pass protection. That's another thing. Carson Beck starts getting hit a little bit. Ole Miss, I think, leads the league in sacks by the defense. So it's one of those things. It's like Ole Miss's defense is definitely good enough to win this game. To our point earlier, you talked about it. Have they raised the ceiling to match Georgia? I think the defense, again, I'm not saying it's the greatest defense of all time, but it's drastically improved. They can go wreck some havoc plays, force some turnovers. They're good enough to beat Georgia. I think you would agree with that, Chris. Ole Miss's defense this year is definitely improved, good enough to beat Georgia, especially this Georgia team coming in on the road offensively with Carson Beck. I'm with you. It's an issue with Carson Beck. What is he, 20-2 as a starter? But you really think about it, would this be his biggest win? Probably in his 2 years as a starter. I mean, right now, what is his biggest win right now?
This no doubt. And we were talking about this, Dave, going into the Bama game. We were talking about this coming into the season, that people wanted to make the debate who was the best quarterback in the SEC. You looked at Carson Beck and you said, well, at least you can say he's going to have his opportunities to prove you right or prove you wrong. So certainly this is another opportunity for him. I mean, you look at the Bama game, like he was great in that second half, but he was so terrible in that first half. Yeah, I mean, at some point, Dave, like you got to show up in a big game and play well from start to finish. So the stage is set for both Jackson Dart and Carson Beck, but certainly from the Beck perspective, the stage is set for him. Like if you want people to talk about you as the best quarterback in the conference and talk about NFL draft stuff, like you got to show up in games like this and play well, start to finish.
Even back in the Texas game they played, so he didn't play well.
Yeah.
Had 3 interceptions.
Like his biggest knock, Dave, or one of his biggest knocks in the preseason was, oh, he's okay, but he's just on a team that carries him. And I adamantly disagreed with that. But now I sit here, David, I'm like, that's exactly what's happening. He is playing really poorly, and the defense is bailing him out, and the rest of the team's carrying him. That's it. How many chances can you get? You know what I mean? Like, how many picks can you throw and keep getting the ball back with an opportunity? Like, at some point, again, we saw it with Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, Dave. It's going to cost you. Like, at some point, a good team's going to beat you.
Especially like you said, when you're playing another good team, as good as Georgia is on paper, and again, Kirby Smart said that this is not a deep team. It's probably his least deep, like has the least amount of depth of any team he's had, maybe since 2016, his first year before that. But you sit here and you talk and you look at it and you're like, when you give 3 turnovers up to another good football team, you are not going to win games, dude. I'm not even talking about Florida with their third-string quarterback. If they go on the road and he throws 3 picks, or I might even say 2 picks and he has a strip sack fumble or something, like you do that, you're probably not going to win this game. I mean, here's a good question for you, Chris. Who would you take at quarterback right now, Jackson Dart or Carson Beck?
I would go Jackson Dart.
And even that's Dart, who probably hasn't, once they got into he put up big numbers in the first 4 games against the Furmans, Georgia Southerns, Wake Forest of the world, but Middle Tennessee State. But since conference plays came on, he's been a little all over, but he's not costing. I can't say games because Georgia's not losing games outside Alabama right now, but he's not giving up field position and possessions and just
you don't, Dave. You don't go with a
back on the sideline. I mean, you were at the game, Chris, so you can't see it, but. Dude, he goes back to the sideline, and it's after every interception, he just leaves his helmet on and is just sitting on the bench just like this. Just like, he's like, is this guy even with us? Right now, it's just like, he just looks like a space cadet. I said it yesterday on the Sunday Funday show. He just looks like a space cadet at times. It's like, dude, what are you seeing? Like, you would love to be in a film room with him on Sunday, with him and Bobo, and I'm sure Kirby steps into, and you're just like, Carson, like, what like you said, what are you looking at, dude? There are 3 defenders in that area. There's an underneath defender that's going to come in and intercept that right there, dude. What are you doing? Like, you do that on Saturday against Ole Miss, they're probably going to lose the football game. You cannot give this offense, who for Ole Miss has struggled themselves at times, but the difference between him and Carson Beck, in my opinion, Carson Beck isn't having, and again, I think you can use this and add another layer of context to it, back-breaking turnovers. Now, have they been completely back-breaking for Georgia? No, because they're still winning the game. But Kirby Smart knows well enough, hey, dude, we can survive this crap against a backup quarterback at Florida. And again, he had it against Texas, and Texas is a good team. But the start that they had against Texas, especially the defense, and I'll say this, Texas's offense is more of a dink and dunk underneath, as you see. That's where Quinn Ewers is comfortable. Ole Miss is more like a basketball team. They're going to go take their shots, especially if Trey Harris can get a little more healthy. Then Kayan Lee's kind of coming into his own. Jordan Watkins. They're going to take more shots and test a guy like Daniel Harris in the Georgia secondary. Whereas I think Texas is like, we're going to try to get you with the crossers and get your eye discipline. I think Lane's going to be, we're going to go take a shot. Him and Charlie Weiss are going to take a shot. So that's going to be the difference where I think if Carson Beck has 3 turnovers in this game, I think Georgia can create more explosive plays than Texas was willing to try against Georgia's defense, if that makes sense.
To your point, Dave, status of Trey Harris, something certainly to pay attention to this week. I mean, listen, they built a lot of positive momentum in Fayetteville, over 500 yards passing for Dart. What was it? Oh, my God. Jordan Watkins with over, 280 yards receiving.
5 touchdowns.
5 touchdowns, which I think they set records offensively. I know with the point score, that was the most they've ever scored, I believe, against an SEC opponent. But certainly, if you can get Trey Harris back, if you can get Juice Wells more involved, Caden Lee, like they've got the weapons. Like there's no question. It all comes back, Dave, to trench play. And can they win those battles? Can they win more of them than they lose? Something they couldn't do last year. That's the key. All right, Dave, let's go ahead and dive into our predictions for this one. Ole Miss and Georgia. The stage is set for this one. We've been looking forward to this game, Dave, since the summer. Like you mentioned, you looked at any preseason list of, top 5 or top 10 games in the SEC this season. Ole Miss, Georgia was right there near the top. I'll let you start. Who comes out on top? Rebels, Bulldogs, Saturday at the Vaught.
You're right. I mean, this is it. This is Ole Miss's season, just like it's Alabama and LSU season Saturday. We got a lot of seasons hanging in the balance there. It's like a ladder match, WWE, WrestleMania, Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels just grasping who can bring that title down from the rafters of Madison Square Garden. Obviously, we're playing this in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. But, all right, so I picked Georgia. I picked Texas to beat Georgia. And, again, I'm not going to make my prediction off just what we've done in the past year. But I thought Ole Miss would play well last week against Arkansas. Just kind of felt like it was a good timing. Ole Miss is due to play really well. Again, Arkansas secondary, I don't think it's very good. It's caught up with them. The defense has been fading as the season keeps going. But again, 60 points on air is impressive. So give Ole Miss their flowers from that perspective. I do think Georgia, Kirby Smart, and Glen Schumann will have a really good game plan to stop this Ole Miss offense. That, again, in conference play, outside of the Arkansas game, has not been awesome. Really hadn't really clicked like we thought they would. They have some injuries on the offensive line. You mentioned Trey Harris. Can they get Caden Priestcorn going in the game as well at the tight end spot? Looks like they're going to the right kid. The transfer from the tight end transfer from Virginia Tech, Daquan Wright, has done a good job. Or Daquan Wright has done a good job for them as well. I don't know. I just think there's a little bit of some personal stuff there between maybe a little Glen Schumann, Lane Kiffin. I think Georgia's going to be on their best again. This is, as you know, Chris, they're always at their best when they're backed against the wall. I think a lot of people, not probably is the Texas game because they'll tiptoe it just like me and you are a little bit. I think some people will be picking Ole Miss, though, in this game. I think Kirby's master propaganda, hey, no one believes us. He loves this. People are kind of doubting him a little bit. I think defensively, they're going to be fine. They're going to definitely play well enough to win. I think offensively, I think for both teams. I think offensively for Georgia, offensively for Ole Miss. What quarterback? It sounds simple. What quarterback plays the better football game across the board? And when I say better, I don't necessarily mean, hey, dude, Jackson Dart's not going for 500 yards again. I think anybody could tell you that watches football. Who limits the mistakes, dude? I think the quarterback, it keeps the turnovers to under 2 is going to win this football game. I don't think Carson Beck, once again, is going to be great because I do think Ole Miss has raised the floor on defense. I think they have. They have some corners that can survive out there. Trey Amos coming over from Alabama. I like the Kennedy kid. He's an aggressive guy. Gets some penalties at times, but I'd rather be aggressive than not. But I think Georgia makes the least amount of mistakes here. That's wild to say because Carson Beck's played so bad. But I think they're going to drill it in his head this week. Like, hey, man, you can't get us beat. Now, a thing that we're going to have to be ready for. Ole Miss has one of their better pass rushing fronts they've had in a long time. Trevor Etienne, what's his status? Can these true freshmen at the running back spot be better in pass pro? Can they pick up some of this stuff that Pete Golden potentially will bring? That'll be key. It's going to come down to turnovers at the quarterback position. I just trust Georgia and Kirby Smart a little more. I just do. Give me Georgia 24-21. I think Georgia 24-21. Again, you could go either way. This wouldn't shock me. I just trust Georgia's defense against the Ole Miss offense a little more than I trust the Ole Miss defense against the Georgia offense here. Carson Beck still just in my head a little bit, though, Chris, where I'm like, dude, he's got it. I mean, I'm not even worried about him throwing 2 or 3 touchdowns, dude. No, dude, you can't turn the football over. They got to get somewhat of the run game going. I think Mike Bobo gets in his bag a little bit, though, and calls one of his better games. Again, these interceptions aren't on Mike Bobo, though. Anybody telling you that is very naive. Those are bad interceptions that a high school level quarterback sees some of these windows and would not throw it as well. So that's got to improve. I'm just going to lean Georgia, though, because, again, I learned my lesson against Texas. Not picking this game just because of that. I just trust Georgia heading into this one to get a tough 3-point win at Vaught Hemingway Stadium on Saturday.
Dave said he doesn't want to be on the Kirby Smart highlight reel when it comes to some of that propaganda and disrespect that he was mentioning, I think is what it is. No, to your point, Dave, I mean, you know, we learned a very, very hard lesson when we all went Texas a few weeks ago. And again, like you said, it's not why you make a pick one way or the other, but you were reminded like, oh, yeah, Georgia doesn't lose to people in the regular season not named Alabama. You know what I mean? They just don't. I mean, the last time that happened, 2019, the South Carolina Gamecocks came into Athens. And again,
2020? Well, it's Florida, right?
2024. You are correct. That was the last time at home. That's what I meant. Yeah. I apologize. 2020 to your point. Sorry, Gators fans, for missing that. Anyways, but they rarely, if ever, hardly ever lose in the regular season, period, but certainly the team's not named Alabama. You know, you mentioned, though, Dave, the thing that I go back to in this game is this. Carson Beck. If you're telling me that it's going to come down to which quarterback has less turnovers or 2 or less, I've given Carson Beck, man, the benefit of the doubt week after week after week going into the season. I ranked him near the top in regards to, you know, where I felt about the best quarterbacks in the conference. My trust for Carson Beck is just gone, Dave. And at some point, it's going to catch up with you. Now, is it this week? I don't know that it is. I don't know. Has Ole Miss done enough? My biggest question, Dave, was has Ole Miss done enough in the trenches to make up what was last year, what, a 30-point margin of defeat? It's one thing to upgrade your roster, but, I mean, you didn't lose that game by 3 or by 7 or even by 10. You got blasted. You got manhandled. And it was going to take 1 or 2 or 3 more good pieces added to your football team to make up that wide of a gap, Dave. That being said, I do believe in momentum. I think momentum in college football is as important as it's ever been. I don't know how you can watch last week with Ole Miss because, to your point, what they did, that'd be impressive against Air. To go out against an SEC opponent on the road, Fayetteville was rocking. They were fired up, right, hoping for that signature win. You go out there and throw for over 500 yards. You put on the offensive showcase the way they did, Dave. I think that means something here. Georgia, it kind of feels like to me they're treading water a little bit. They're trudging along. Which listen, winning in 2024, that's all that matters. Because as crazy as this college football season is, a win's a win's a win. You don't complain when you get one. That being said, though, Dave, what is Ole Miss's best win at this point? Was it at South Carolina? Because you look at what South Carolina's doing, the way they won that game 27-3, pretty high-quality win. They beat Oklahoma, They even won at Arkansas. The way they did it was impressive. And outside of that, they had those 4 non-conference wins. Going into the season, I don't think I ever thought Ole Miss was like a real national title contender, like they're going to win it all. And maybe I was wrong for that, but I just didn't quite see them that way. But that being said, Dave, I always felt like they were on the path to get a signature win, to get one of these signature wins, whether it was at LSU or what have you. Because to your point, this is their season. This is why Walker Jones, the Grove Collective, everybody came together, right? The efforts were all on this 2024 season. This is the year. Jackson Dart, The Last Dance, all that stuff we heard from before the season, all off season long, it's all come down to this, Dave. It's come down to this game. This game will define the 2024 season for the Ole Miss Rebels. To your point, Kirby Smart, master motivator. There's none better in college football when it comes to getting his team ready to go. And to your point, even if they're not really this way, Dave, making them feel like backs against the wall, nobody believes in us, they want to take what's yours, right? That type of pregame chatter, if you will. Nobody's better at that. But even with that, Dave, Ole Miss, I think, is due one of these signature wins for the 2024 season. I loved what I saw last week, granted, against Arkansas, but I loved what I saw from Jackson Dart, who I think may be starting to come into his own a little bit, over 500 yards passing, momentum and confidence. It's such an important thing in college football today. Like you said, I think they're going to take their shots down the field. I think they're going to be able to win some of those battles, especially if you get a Trey Harris back. But I love what I saw from Watkins. I love what I'm seeing from Caden Lee pre-scoring. They've got the weapons on the offensive side, I think, to give Georgia fits. You mentioned that chess match between Lane Kiffin and Glen Schumann and Kirby Smart. That's going to be one for the ages to watch. And I think, to your point, Ole Miss has done enough defensively in the front seven to where, how am I supposed to trust that Carson Beck, when he's under duress this weekend at Vaught Hemingway, is going to make good decisions? I just can't do it, man. I just cannot do it. Carson Beck is throwing up stinker after stinker after stinker, and it's going to cost you at some point, and I think it cost Georgia this weekend. I've got the Ole Miss Rebels getting that signature win. Their season all comes down to this. They get that signature win. Lane Kiffin, the Grove Collective, it's a score for everyone, for all Ole Miss Rebels. Give me Ole Miss 33, Georgia 28, in a little bit of a higher scoring affair than maybe some would expect. But I think momentum's a real thing. I think Ole Miss has got their mojo back offensively. They build off that big game in Fayetteville. They take it to the Dogs. The season has all come down to this. It always has. It always was. And Ole Miss finds a way to take down Georgia and hand them a rare regular season loss. So,
I agree with you. It's going to come down to, and I can see where people are picking Ole Miss because you don't trust Carson Beck. It's going to come down to turnovers for both quarterbacks and short fields. Like, who is making those critical turnovers deep in their own territory? And like I mentioned, something to keep an eye on for the fans listening to the preview. Texas likes, again, they'll take their shots. They're crossing.
Very dink and dug. They are very check down. Quinn Ewers loves the check down.
The short intermediate.
Loves it.
Kiffin and them are a basketball team. It's funny. College basketball starting today. Kiffin and them are going to take their shots. And you know, Chris, sometimes it doesn't matter what you scheme up. Sometimes it's just a one-on-one. Your guy has to make a play or their guy has to make a play. And sometimes your guy just gets beat. It just is what it is. So if guys like Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins can keep doing that, having those big games, maybe the tight ends, Priest, Corn, and Wright, it is what it is. Those will be the plays that you're going to have to keep in mind, where Georgia is going to have to keep in mind where, hey, you could get some stops early in this game. But again, it's going to be a little bombs over. It's going to be more bombs over Baghdad, where they can go pick up some more of those yards that Texas was not willing to go get. So I think that'll be something to keep an eye on. Again, that matchup between Daniel Harris and the secondary, I could see Lane Kiffin trying to go after him.
And no matter what happens, Dave, SEC Unfiltered will be boots on the ground in Oxford for the SEC Unfiltered Tour. Again, my first ever stop to the Grove, to Vaught Hemingway. Dave, you know very well. Any suggestions you might
Chris
have?
a library card. You Ole Miss people know
The library.
I'm going to get this guy a library card.
I've heard good things. I've heard good things about the library, so we shall see. The festivities will be next level, I know for a fact, this weekend. But guys, listen, do you agree with us? Do you disagree? How do you see this thing playing out when Ole Miss and Georgia do battle on Saturday in Oxford? Guys, that's going to do all for us. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in. Again, make sure you like, subscribe, turn notifications. Check us out via podcast, wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us across all social media platforms, as well as our website, secunfiltered.com. For Dave Shumate, I'm Chris Phillips. Appreciate each and every single one of you tuning in, and we will catch you on the other side.